will be in front of the Senate soon. The economic environment, what that's meant to each and every one of you, and to share your personal experiences. So thank you for being here. I want to recognize the leadership of Senator Cortez Masto. It's been another strong partnership in putting these conversations together. And I want to thank her, her office, and her staff for all the work that they've done. I want to thank my staff as well and my team and all the collaboration. Many of them are here throughout the room today. But thank you all for everything. I also want to recognize Leader Schumer, who will be joining us today, Ranking Member Wyden of the Finance Committee, and several other United States senators will be joining us throughout the day. They're scheduled to be here. There's a vote that will be called at the top of the 2 o'clock hour, so you may see a few of us running in and out. That's where we're headed to, and we'll return as quickly as we're able to. But the conversation today in the committee room that we sit in is to discuss a topic that's impacting all people across the United States, and it's President Trump's reckless trade policies. Today, we aren't going to be talking about the theoretical tariff policy, not what it looks like on a balance sheet, but instead what it means at the kitchen table. When you all are making decisions about businesses, about your personal lives, personal impact, what does that mean? That's what I'm hearing from constituents as I travel across New Mexico, whether I'm in a grocery store or you're chatting with folks after church or wherever it may be. They're explaining to you what this means to them and the bottom line there. Now, today's forum, costs, chaos, and corruption, these aren't just buzzwords. They're the reality for hardworking families across New Mexico, across Nevada, across the entirety of the United States. So let's start with costs. Trump's so-called universal tariffs are nothing more than a giant regressive tax hike on the American people. When policy is put in place and costs go up, someone's responsible for it. And that's the reality of what we're seeing across New Mexico today. Now, the Penn-Wharton budget model projects that if fully enacted, Trump's global tariffs will cost middle-income families nearly $60,000 over their lifetimes. The reason I use the numbers that are coming out of this particular school is that's where the president went to school. So I figured, if he's going to attend there, let's use their numbers. Now, if it's not billionaires paying this price, it's teachers, truck drivers, farmers, and parents just trying to get students back to school. Right now, President Trump's tariffs are expected to cost American households $2,600 a year. $2,600. If Trump's pause global tariffs go through on July 9th, and there was a court decision that says they can go through, the figure only climbs higher. That means rising prices on everyday essentials from clothing, shoes, to produce, cars. Thanks to President Trump, a new car will cost thousands more. Building a home, that will cost almost $11,000 more. Now let's talk about the chaos. These tariffs aren't part of a coherent economic strategy. They're being slapped on and taken back based on political whims. That's all this is. Small businesses don't know what rules they're operating under from one day to another. The rules keep changing based on someone's sleep or whether the coffee had enough caffeine in the morning, I'm guessing. Now, in New Mexico, the uncertainty has ripple effects, and I'm guessing that's true all across America. Coffee shops, board game stores, businesses like Bike Technology International, who's also with us today, about how President Trump's trade chaos has impacted their ability to plan and succeed. Most small business owners tell me, just tell me the rules. Give me some certainty for the next year. I'll abide by them. But you can't be changing them quarter to quarter, month to month, week to week, or even day to day. I've heard also from many small coffee roasters from my state. Prices were already rising before these tariffs. Now, President Trump's 10% base tariff on places like Indonesia and Vietnam means coffee costs even more. Coffee drinkers across the country, those of you in this room, whether you're making it at home or you're purchasing it at your favorite local spot on your way to whatever the day brings you. If the next round of tariffs reach the amounts President Trump announced earlier this year, we could see a 32% tariff on imports from Indonesia. That's an expensive cup of coffee for people all across the country, especially for those coffee roasters back in New Mexico who are just operating on the margins right now. Many of the businesses I spoke to were reluctant to raise prices on consumers. They're being as weary as we all think that someone can be, but it's getting tough. They also don't see much of an alternative at this point. So let me be clear. Tariffs can be a useful tool when they're targeted and they're thought out and they're used as strong economic policy. But this notion of just across the board based on a whim, these are hurting people. They've never worked. As a matter of fact, when you look at historically in the United States, what's happened when this tool has been used, it's never worked. The last time was about 100 years ago, right, Senator? After World War II. It failed then. We know the catastrophe that resulted in a financial meltdown in America. So the courts have said that the president's abusing his authority. That's not my opinion. Anyone else? That's gone through the courts, through the system. That's what they've said thus far. Congress has also said so, and we're going to keep fighting to rein in this overreach. So finally, the corruption. During President Trump's first term, what all of the data showed that companies with ties to him or the Republican Party were far more likely to get exemptions from tariffs. It shouldn't be partisan. This is the United States. It doesn't matter if you're from a red state or a blue state, who you voted for, how you registered to vote. Economic policy should apply to people across the United States, not just those that are his friends and those that he doesn't like. Now, in his second term, there isn't even an official process, just backroom deals, an announcement. I mean, heck, the secretaries that are responsible for federal agencies are finding out about what the president's going to do based on a social media feed. They're not even having a conversation in the cabinet. Meanwhile, small business owners in places like Santa Fe, New Mexico, or Newport, Vermont, you are just left to fend for yourselves. Now, the witnesses that we've invited today to speak to the real consequences of these policies, from economists to farmers to small business owners, including one from my backyard right in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Their stories will show that this isn't about political ideology. It's about impact. The bottom line is this. President Trump's tariffs are a tax on working families, a gut punch to the small businesses, and a green light for corruption. And while these tariffs drive up costs, Republicans are advancing this piece of legislation called a reconciliation bill. You know, they call it a big, beautiful something. It's a big, beautiful betrayal. That's what this is amounting to. It's going to further raise costs. And it's going to further betrayal the middle class. As financial burdens grow heavier for families already struggling, it is unconscionable that my colleagues are proposing to cut vital programs like nutrition programs, access to food, or even access to health care, programs like Medicaid. I mean, Medicare is even on the choppy block right now with my Republican colleagues. I think we all owe it to the American people to step back. For all of my colleagues, tell the truth. Explain to the American people what's about to happen so they can plan. They can make decisions for their businesses and in their personal lives. There needs to be a better solution. And with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to my colleague, leader, co-chair of all of the initiatives in this particular space, United States Senator Catherine Cortez Masto from Nevada.
Thank you. Ben Ray, first of all, thank you so much. Thank you for taking the lead on this important issue. Thank you to your staff and your team. They are incredible. I want to thank my team as well for really the hard work they've put into this discussion. And most importantly, all of you, thank you for participating. Let me say this. Ben Ray just really was so articulate about the challenges we're facing right now with the policies coming from this administration. And I will tell you, it is pretty much overload. There's so many things coming out, and they're impacting our families and our businesses. One of them we're going to talk about today is the impact of the tariff policy alone. That's just one policy. But I do have to highlight this because there's a connection between what this administration is doing with these blanket tariffs and this reconciliation package, right? This reconciliation package that this administration is moving forward with is focused on taking away health care, cutting Medicaid, and taking away health care from 16 million Americans. It is going to cause higher costs, higher healthcare costs for not only families and individuals, but our small businesses. That is exactly what it's going to do. They are taking away the opportunity for so many working families to have food assistance. Ben Ray just talked about this. And what we see happening along with all of that is this reconciliation package is going to increase energy costs for everyone across the country. Now, here's how it's connected. The congressional Republicans and this president, as they move this reconciliation package through Congress without any bipartisan support, without any discussion around what makes sense, what works for Americans, what works for our small businesses, they are actually moving forward, and it will add $2.4 trillion, $2.4 trillion to our national deficit. They have to pay for that somehow. Some of that is through the cuts that I just talked about on the backs of hardworking families and individuals and small businesses. But the other thing they're doing is trying to utilize these blanket tariffs to raise revenue to pay for some of that deficit. Now, what most people don't connect the dots, and rightfully so, they shouldn't. They've got busy lives. They just want an opportunity to have that good life and less stress and not jump through so many red tape hurdles from the federal government. But what they don't realize is that money that is raised through these tariffs is on the backs of these very Americans and businesses. So it's a double whammy. The tariffs, the reconciliation package, it's about taking away, it's about taxing the middle class, the working poor, our small businesses. So don't let anybody tell you differently. There's a connection here. And it is cruel, it is mean, it is harmful, and it is not helping a majority of our country and expanding and growing our economy, nor is it creating jobs. It is not doing that. And so as and I'm going to say the same thing as Ben Ray did in New Mexico, in Nevada, when I am home, this is the number one issue I hear all over my state. The uncertainty, the chaos, the concern, the fear, the corruption, everything that is happening. I spent a lot of time with my families, with my small businesses, and as you all know, many of our small businesses, they quite honestly, are the backbone of our economy. Literally, small businesses, that's what happens. In our communities, they're the backbone. They create jobs in our communities. They care about our communities and our community members and their employees. And the goal is to try to keep them open and make sure that they can thrive and survive. But we also know our small businesses, razor-thin profit margin. And when you now hit them with higher costs for their supplies and these tariffs and these blanket tariffs, it's going to have a devastating impact on small businesses. I can't tell you how many times I've had a conversation with Ambassador of Trade for this administration, who says to all of us and the rest of the country, don't worry, these tariffs and this economic policy is okay, because it'll be a short-term pain for long-term gain. But I don't know, and I've said to him, well, how do I tell that to a small business who's closed their doors? Because that short-term pain, they're not going to be around for the long-term gain. And you're devastating our communities. But there's this cruel nature about it, and they're focused on the numbers and the dollars that they're going to raise, and they don't care where that comes from. And that's the importance of being able to come forward today and talk about these tariffs. So I am so pleased that we have some of our panelists today. One of them is Preston Martin, who's going to be joining us via video. He's a small business owner, and he has facilities both in Nevada and New Mexico. And you're going to hear from him that his bicycle parts distribution company had concerns about expanding because of these blanket tariffs. We am also pleased that Steve Wright is joining us as well, the president and general manager of Jay Peak Resort. Southern Nevada, and particularly Nevada, relies heavily on a tourism trade and travel for our revenue. And I know Mr. Wright understands that. We have concerns, and what we're seeing in the economy is a lack of visitor interest because not of just the tariffs, but the way that this administration has attacked some of our neighbors, including Canadians, and who are not coming to Nevada and traveling into the United States any longer. So we will hear from Mr. Wright as well. I want to say a couple things finally, is that I support trade. I think we have to have a balanced trade approach, and I think we have to have targeted trade that actually works to help grow our economy, create jobs, bring manufacturing back to this country. But the blanket tariffs of this administration are doing just the opposite. And that is not a trade policy that this country should ever adopt or move forward. And so for us, the ability for all of us to be able to talk about it and really highlight what is happening in our communities, we're hopeful that so many others will have the courage to come forward and say no more. And then finally, earlier this week, Senate Democrats filed an amicus brief in support of a recent court finding that Trump's tariffs are illegal. The U.S. Court of International Trade has ruled that Trump's use of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to impose his tariffs went beyond presidential authority and violated constitutional principles. The administration appealed this decision, and if it is upheld, President Trump would be legally obligated to remove his global blanket tariffs. We learned last night that the court has decided to allow the tariffs to remain in place while the case is under appeal. And so Senate Democrats will continue to fight for the full removal of these damaging blanket tariffs as we move forward with that case. I want to make sure everybody understands the state of affairs with respect to the tariffs and the push that we are doing here in Congress. Finally, thank you all again. There is a lot of fear and retribution concern from so many people in this country, and rightfully so. Unfortunately, this administration uses that fear to gain power. And by the way, a true democracy is built on trust, not fear. It is important for us to utilize our voices now more than ever to talk about just what's happening and demand change that benefits all of us in this country. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Senator Cortez Masto. It's now my honor to introduce our panel of expert witnesses. Dr. Adam Posen has been president of the Peterson Institute for International Economics since January 2013. During his presidency, the Peterson Institute has won global recognition as the leading international think tank, the leading independent think tank in international economics. Thank you for being here, Dr. Posen. A longtime advocate for workers' rights, Ms. Lee has recently served as the Deputy Undersecretary for International Affairs at the United States Department of Labor, where she led global efforts to protect labor standards and fair trade. Formerly president of the Economic Policy Institute and leader at the AFL-CIO, she's advised multiple federal commissions on economic trade policy and remains a prominent voice on wage inequality and global labor rights. Thank you so much for being here. Now, Mr. Preston Martin, as was already mentioned by Senator Cortez Masto, he is a leading bicycle parts distributor based both in New Mexico and Nevada. I've had the pleasure of visiting his facility in Santa Fe and look forward to returning soon. Folks that ride bikes across America, they know about BTI. As the CEO and founder of Bicycle Technologies International, Preston has a national reach and brings 30 years of industry experience to the conversation. I now want to recognize Miss Emma Jagaz, is that correct? She's a first-generation farmer. I appreciate that, growing up on a small farm myself, Emma, but what we grew was for self-consumption. You know, we shared it with families and whatnot. There's a lot to learn from you and the work that you've done. She's the founder of Moon Valley Farm in Maryland, where she provides sustainability, grown, health-focused produce to build a more equitable food system. She also sits on the Maryland Ag Commission, where she speaks with farmers throughout the state on the economic impact of tariff policies on their farms and businesses. I'm sure we're going to hear a bit about that today. I now want to recognize Senator Peter Welch of Vermont for an introduction.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
One more. There you go. That's it.
we got a lot of important people here, but we also have an important Vermonter here, Steve Wright. And Steve is the general manager of Jay Peak, which is right on the Canadian border. And they've had an incredible relationship both with Vermonters and New Englanders and Canadians over the years. Steve's been in the ski industry for over 30 years, previously worked at Killington Resort, a major ski area in Vermont. And he's currently the chair of the Vermont Ski Areas Association. What I also appreciate about Steve is he's totally involved in local economic development activity up in the part of Vermont we call the Northeast Kingdom, which would like to get you up there. You know, you guys brag an awful lot about where you're from. Well, I like to brag where we're from. And you will not be disappointed if you let Steve show you around. So I look forward to hearing about your testimony. We had some roundtables, business roundtables, and had folks, you know, some of whom voted for Trump, some of whom voted for Harris, just talking about the practical reality of what these tariffs mean in the myth of who pays them, ultimately us. So we look forward to hearing from Steve, and thank you so much for making the trip down here.
Thank you so much, Senator Welch. Dr. Posey, you're recognized.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you all for your bravery in the environment that Senator Cortez Masto mentioned to make this a public issue. It is the role of the Senate Finance Committee to treat tariffs as a tax and to evaluate it, whether it is a good form of tax or a bad form of tax. And the title of this hearing or this spotlight is exactly right. It is a bad form of tax in terms of costs versus the amount of revenue you raise, in terms of costs, who pays the tax, in terms of chaos, it inherently creates uncertainty, which affects small business, which affects individuals trying to plan their lives, which affects consumers, and it provides widespread opportunities for corruption that other forms of taxation either do not or do on a fraction of the scale. And I'm saying all this not because I was scripted by your excellent staff. It's because your excellent staff has properly conveyed what the vast majority of economic research on 250 years of trade policy in the US and beyond has taught us. Cost, chaos, corruption are reasons you don't use tariffs as a large-scale revenue-gaining point. So let me go on and draw on the work of a number of my colleagues at the Peterson Institute, in particular that of Kimberly Klossing and Mary Lovely, who've looked at the tax incidence, meaning the numbers of who pays what when you put on this kind of tariff. Other colleagues have worked on other aspects. The key point is, as the number cited up here, is we come up with a number that the middle quintile of the US income distribution would pay $2,600 a year in additional taxes, in lost income, real after-tax income. That number goes up the further down the income distribution you go. That we have a number that it's for the lowest quintile of Americans, households in terms of income, they would lose 3.7% of their income, or they would lose more than $2,600, closer to $3,000 a year. So as Senator Cortez Masto put it, this is a double whammy. You are taking away Medicaid, other aspects of the society that the US government has voted to pay for, to help working people and to help small business and to help farmers and help labor, and then you are asking the same people to pay more taxes. This is just bad on the face of it as both a human and a political matter. But also as an economic matter, it makes no sense because it's a very inefficient way to generate revenue. Estimates done not just by the Peterson Institute, but by the center-right Tax Foundation, by the center-left Yale Budget Lab, by the Penn Wharton studies that Senator Lujan mentioned, they all show that you would end up not just collecting something on the order of 1.5% of GDP a year in tariffs, if the tariffs all stay on, if there is no evasion, if there is no industrial restructuring, if there is no retaliation, if all that, it all stays on, you get maybe 1.5% of GDP a year, but that's small compared to everything else that the reconciliation package proposes to do that adds up to the $4 trillion over 10 years. And more importantly, all those ifs are not going to come true. Inherently, if the president is using arbitrary executive power and insists he's going to make deals and bargains and create exceptions for this country or that industry, you're not going to get that much revenue. Inherently, because this is not done by congressional legislation and cannot be depended upon for the 10-year window of reconciliation, there is uncertainty. You're not going to get the full amount of money. Inherently, because tariffs involve international affairs in a way that other domestic taxes do not, you're at risk of losing things from other countries' retaliation or non-response. And inherently, you're going to have more impact on growth negatively through the distortions that the taxes make. I will leave it to my colleagues here and the witnesses who can articulate in very real terms what this has meant for their farms, their businesses, their workers. It's real. But from the top-down data, the evidence is clear and also real. This is a very inefficient way, a very unjust way to create government revenue, and it creates insufficient, uncertain streams of government revenue in a way that erodes our tax base. Congress should be making tax policy through legislation, not through executive orders accepting them. Congress should be making tax policy for those most able to pay and benefit to pay the most. Congress should be making taxes on the broadest feasible basis for efficiency and also to prevent corruption and abuse. Congress should be setting tax policies to encourage growth. In America's self-interest, national security, and economic, Congress should not be making its tax policy to provoke fights with other countries, rather than working with them to figure out where they owe us money in a constructive way. The tariff policies of President Trump's administration and those embodied in the reconciliation bill fail on every one of those criteria. I commend the Senate Finance Committee Democrats, and I hope some Republicans will join you in asserting that Congress, the Senate Finance Committee, should treat this as a tax bill. And if you treat this as a tax bill, it fails the American people.
That's good. Dr. Posen, thank you so very much. Ms. Lee, you're recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you so much, Senators Lujan and Cortez Masto, Senator Welch, for convening us today for this important and timely topic, and for inviting me to be on this excellent panel. For most of the last 3 decades, through both Republican and Democratic administrations, U.S. trade policy has failed to address the interests and concerns of working people or domestic producers, with dire consequences: hollowing out of industries and regions, growing wage inequality, and unreliable, inhumane, and opaque global supply chains. The Biden administration took many consequential steps to address these failures, and I am proud to have contributed to President Biden's global labor strategy, to the first ever worker-driven, worker-centered trade policy, and to the administration's long overdue and thoughtful investments in clean energy, infrastructure, and good jobs. While these policies taken together represented an absolutely necessary change in course, it will take more than 4 years to repair the damage of decades. President Trump capitalized on many Americans' frustration with corporate globalization in both of his campaigns. But President Trump's chaotic, erratic, and disproportionate second-term trade policy, in conjunction with his vigorous efforts to deplete the federal workforce, weaken the Department of Labor, terminate critical infrastructure projects, and cancel all international labor projects, will not achieve his stated goals and will have devastating effects on American households. Trade policy, as others have said, can be a powerful tool to change the behavior of both governments and corporations when used judiciously, strategically, consistently, and with clearly communicated goals. The Trump trade policy fails on all counts. First, the Trump trade policy has not communicated to trading partners or to businesses what they need to do differently to avoid future tariffs. Trade policy should be targeted to address specific unfair trade practices, including exploitive labor policy, industrial subsidies, tax avoidance, overcapacity, or predatory pricing policies. Negotiating bilateral, non-transparent deals with more than 100 countries over the course of a couple of months is a recipe for chaos and corruption. Unions, civil society, and the private sector have relevant knowledge and a huge stake in the outcome of these discussions and should have a seat at the table. Judicious trade policy requires examining each product and each trading partner, market conditions, and supply chains, not imposing tariffs on products the United States does not produce and on countries with strong labor and environmental protections with which we have a long-standing and deeply integrated production history, like Canada. Strategic trade policy should target problematic trade partners with egregious practices in sectors that are important for future growth. I share the stated goal of incentivizing more domestic production and reducing our overall trade imbalance, but it is unreasonable to expect businesses to make sourcing decisions, which often take many years, based on tariff levels that change without warning or clear rationale. And when we talk about bringing manufacturing jobs home, we have to talk about the quality of those jobs. Manufacturing jobs are good jobs, largely because American workers fought for and won strong democratic unions, which negotiated for a fair share of the wealth they produced. The Trump administration, in contrast, has gutted the National Labor Relations Board, the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, and is looking to cut the Department of Labor staff by 27%, if not more. President Trump has attacked unions and collective bargaining rights for federal employees and has rescinded key investments made under the Biden administration in clean energy and manufacturing, threatening the jobs of thousands of workers. What is the point of bringing manufacturing jobs home if this administration is simultaneously destroying existing jobs and undermining wages, freedom of association, and workplace safety? We should not be looking to create squalid, unsafe, underpaid jobs in the United States of America. Tariffs are not automatically passed on to consumers dollar for dollar. Retailers and importers have discretion, depending on the nature of the product, competition, time frame. It may be rational for companies to absorb small or short-term tariffs. On the other hand, retailers can also take advantage of uncertainty around tariffs to raise prices preemptively or excessively. The Trump tariffs will certainly raise prices for ordinary households due to their unprecedented level, wide coverage, and abrupt implementation. The uncertainty around the tariffs is one of the most destructive aspects, as businesses are unable to plan for the future and may shut down production lines if key inputs are affected, laying off American workers. Tariff-related price hikes would be acceptable if the tariffs were achieving a worthwhile goal, such as stemming the import of goods produced under egregious labor conditions, protecting wages and jobs, or rationalizing global climate policy. But the Trump tariffs bring all pain and no gain. In the short term, there will be uncertainty, supply bottlenecks, unpredictable price hikes, and likely decreases in both imports and exports due to retaliation. In the long term, there will be irreparable rifts with valued trading partners and lack of coordination on shared goals. Up until this trade fiasco, the United States was well-positioned to lead a global conversation about needed reforms to multilateral trade rules, including enforceable workers' rights and environmental standards, global coordination to address overcapacity, and striking a better balance between the domestic regulatory agenda and international trade. It will take many years to rebuild our credibility and leadership. At the end of the day, we do not live in the global economy in isolation, and we cannot bully our way to prosperity. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to your questions.
Steve, thank you so very much. Mr. Martin, you're now recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you. Thank you, Senators Lujan and Cortez Masto, for inviting me to speak today from Santa Fe. It's a great honor to share our business story. I'm sure we'd all rather be talking about something positive like the benefits of cycling, but that's not why I'm here. Our employee-owned business, Bicycle Technologies International, BTI for short, is caught in the middle of a global trade war. It's jeopardizing what we've built over the past 32 years in business. In that time, we've grown to be one of the largest wholesale bicycle parts distributors in the country, importing tens of thousands of items from all over the world. 400 vendors and 4,000 retailers are depending on BTI to connect the factory to the consumer. But we have a problem. The president's new tariffs are causing BTI pain on several fronts. New tariffs are making our operating margins unsustainable. So instead of historic average of 5% tariffs on bicycle parts, BTI is now paying 10 to 50% in tariffs. Since February, we've racked up over $100,000 in new tariffs, but we're still waiting on our vendors to raise the prices so that we can recover those new tariffs. Vendors are, of course, hesitant to raise dealer and retail prices. And no one in our supply chain has the margins to absorb tariffs, so all tariff costs will have to be passed on, as they always have been. New tariffs are also impacting our cash flow. Tariffs get paid up front, meaning tariff dollars are in limbo for an average of 3 to 4 months until a sale is made. This is capital that would normally be used to expand our business. For instance, BTI just bought an imported wheel building robot for $50,000 plus $5,000 in new tariffs. That's $5,000 that we could have reinvested in our employees' wages, benefits, and profit sharing. The bigger issue, though, is that new tariffs effectively reduce BTI's buying power, and that translates to more missed sales. Also, new tariffs are undermining larger investments. We're outgrowing our Nevada warehouse. We invested the last 10 months and over $100,000 into the purchase of a 29,000 square foot building in Reno. Unfortunately, we had to terminate the deal due to tariff uncertainty, cash constraints caused by the new tariffs, and a 25-year personal guarantee requirement from the SBA. New tariffs are also causing shortages. Helmets are a great example of America's foreign dependency. To my knowledge, all the bicycle helmets are made in China. Some of our helmet vendors, they've had to cancel their factory orders this year due to extreme tariffs on China. We're not going to get any of those helmets. As a result, a shortage is expected. Remember, helmets are required by law in many areas, especially children's helmets. So this is a major problem. New tariffs are also raising prices dramatically. BTI's biggest suppliers are raising prices this month. Our biggest suppliers are finally raising prices this month after months of racking up these tariffs. Bicycle chains are a prime example, though, of how these tariffs are going to drive inflation. Chains had no tariff before. They're now subject to a steel tariff of 50%. As a result, that retail price of a chain would go from $25 to $40. If the core bicycle consumer, that being the middle class, has to choose between necessities and a chain, the bike industry is going to be the loser. So lastly, the tariffs are causing chaos. With over 90% of bicycle products sourced from outside the US and our US suppliers now paying more for their raw materials, tariff uncertainty is affecting the entire supply chain. US import policies are changing without sufficient notice. It's causing just a never-ending negotiations with our hundreds of our suppliers. Container loads of products are stuck overseas awaiting tariff decisions to be made. BTI is pausing or canceling vendor orders due to the uncertainty. The tariff has nowhere to run, no time to pivot, no incentives to reshore production. Without tariff relief or exclusions, our industry is in a dire situation. So I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Martin. Mr. Wright, you're recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you. Before I start with my comments, I wanted to say thank you to the senators before me here. I think it's, I don't come here to Washington every day. I hear the spirit and the Democratic voice mainly through television, but to sit here and to hear it firsthand gives me hope to hear what the fight and the grind in your voices. Senator Welch, I've heard many times, but I have to say, continue. On behalf of the communities I represent, I'm hopeful that you'll continue doing exactly what you're doing, so thank you. Thank you to Senator Welch for the invitation to participate today, and to Senators Cortez Masto and Lujan for convening this spotlight forum on the devastating impacts of the Trump administration's tariff and trade policies have had on local businesses, especially those reliant on travel and tourism in border states like Vermont. My name is Steve Wright. I'm the president and general manager at J-Peak in northern Vermont. For context, we are a $70 million business located in Orleans County, Vermont. Our only city of Newport is comprised of less than 5,000 residents. And the resort itself is located in Jay, Vermont, which, as of the most recent census, is home to 550 full-time residents. But across any busy weekend at the resort can blossom to nearly 10,000 people a day. Our proximity to Canada allows for half a dozen border crossings within only several miles of my office. Across our 60-year history at Jay Peak, those 10,000 daily visitors are made up of 50% Canadians. They travel from as far away as Toronto, which is 7 to 8 hours away, Montreal, which is anywhere from 90 minutes to 2 hours, and from the eastern townships, which are only a few minutes across the border. The close relationship between Jay and Canada began when we were originally owned by a Canadian company, but it has been strengthened by policy that we enacted several decades ago, which include taking Canadian money at par, which is to say that on all of our non-margin products that we sell, things like lift tickets, admissions to our 70,000 square foot indoor water park, rounds on our championship golf course, which incidentally was designed by Canadian Graham Cook. We take Canadian cash on U.S. currency-based products. Across my time at Jay Peak now, 25 years, that has generally meant a discount of anywhere from 20 to 30% for Canadians. Based on what their economy is doing now, it's closer to 35%. Along with previous Canadian ownership, we have Canadian workers, Canadian homeowners, and dual citizenship locals that strengthen our brand both financially and culturally. Our French fries come with American gravy and Canadian cheese curds, and the resort consumes equal parts Budweiser and Molson. But recently, the longstanding relationship built on the respect and shared enjoyment of the outdoors, as well as economic incentive, has come under fire and cannot be overstated. We are forecasting a potentially catastrophic amount of trouble relating to Canada's unwillingness to visit this summer, next winter, and for some indeterminate future. Not to mention the associated cost escalations relating to maintaining and purchasing new equipment that we need to bring into the country to operate because of President Trump's tariffs. As the economic engine within the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont, an area comprised of 2,000 square miles and roughly 75,000 people, and arguably the most beautiful corner of our state, Jay Peak is the chief supplier of state and local taxes of more than 1,500 full-time, part-time, and seasonal participants in Vermont's workforce, and the most snow in eastern North America, which netted us just under 500 inches this past winter, the last flakes of which were finally melting as I boarded a plane this morning. In short, and as evidenced by our book of business for conferences, weddings, golf rounds, water park visits, and an indoor Olympic ice arena, Canadians simply are not coming. Golf groups are canceling daily. I had one when I was sitting back here waiting to step forward, a 140-person golf group for 2 weeks from now, just canceled. Of the 300 Canadian teams that play in one of our 40 annual hockey tournaments, half are forecasted to cancel this year. Fiscal year 26 winter season passes sold to Canada are off 35%, and a reduction in our workforce as a result is already underway. More chilling than the financial cliff that we're presently nudging toward, though, is the sentiment that we've been able to deduce from longtime Canadian Jay Peakers after I called nearly 100 Canadian households over the course of the last 2 weeks of Canadians who purchased season passes last year but who have not yet purchased this year. They cite the present administration's flagrant disrespect of Canadian independence as not only a challenge to Canadian sovereignty, but to their own identity, and they feel the need to respond. I'm not sure when we're coming back, Steve. One family mentioned me on the phone 2 weeks ago. Frankly, I'm not sure we ever will. And these unforced errors on the part of the current administration are not only causing problems for us at the mountain, but these ripples of negative influence are washing over the entire Vermont travel and tourism economy. In a normal year, roughly 750,000 Canadian tourists come into Vermont and inject roughly $150 million into the state economy. Recent data shows that hotel reservations from Canadian visitors are down 45% between January and April. Credit card spending is down nearly 40% across that same time period. Border crossings have declined now for 5 consecutive months and are down 35% year to date. And most importantly, visits to the Vermont.com website, which is a planning data point reflecting the likelihood of visiting sometime in the future, are off 70% across the first few months of the year. We say in the ski industry, if you're going to succeed even modestly, you better be an optimist. We're relying on fickle weather and an out-of-control climate. We are in remote corners of the country with a diminishing workforce and a near wholesale lack of affordable housing, which means that if you don't have housing figured out before landing in our communities, the chances of you staying there very long are not good. The very last thing that we need added to our plates is the present anti-Canadian narrative being driven by this administration that is neither grounded in logic nor supported by facts. It is my hope that ultimately cooler, more logical heads will prevail, but we certainly have not seen much in the way of cool, and logic appears to be roughly 5 months out the proverbial window. Here in Vermont and within the border economy, we are curious as to when the upside of this anti-Canadian rhetoric starts to present itself, because along with those businesses along the northern border, we are presently living right in the middle of its downside.
Mr. Wright, thank you so very much for your testimony today. Ms. Jagosz, you're recognized for your opening statement.
Senators Lujan and Senators Welch, thank you for this opportunity to testify. My name is Emma Jagosz, and I own and operate Moon Valley Farm, a certified organic vegetable farm and food hub in Maryland. We grow and deliver fresh produce directly to households, restaurants, schools, and food as medicine programs across Maryland, DC, and Northern Virginia. More than that, we're part of a movement to localize and transform the food system to make it more just, climate smart, and rooted in community. As a food hub, we work with over 50 other farmers in the Mid-Atlantic every single week, buying and distributing their produce across our sales channels. I also serve on the Maryland Agriculture Commission as the organic seat, meeting monthly with farmers across the state. I'm in constant communication with other farmers, and tariffs are a major concern across the board. So let me share what I'm hearing from my neighbors and what I'm experiencing on my farm. So down the road from me, a soybean farmer is gravely concerned about his 50th growing season due to retaliatory tariffs from Mexico and Canada, two markets he depends on for inputs and grain sales. During the last Trump administration, he could not make a profit because tariffs squeezed his already thin margins. The next town over, a livestock farmer is losing sleep over increased feed prices and operating expenses from tariffs. He worries that his customers won't be able to afford his products if he raises prices, especially because many of them are federal workers facing job loss and insecurity. A fruit farmer in Washington County fears his farmers market sales will decline as his customer base gets financially squeezed, especially with the SNAP benefits that make many of his sales possible being at risk today. In Carroll County, a craft beer maker told me that hops prices have increased 40% in 2025 alone, and bottle costs are rising. He's concerned, rightly so, about his operation's viability this year. Maryland winemakers face the same challenges. Cultivating Craft estimates that nearly 50% of Maryland craft beer and winemakers may close within the year if tariff pressures continue. So here's what I know. Small and medium scale farmers of all political affiliations are bracing for a tough year. Input costs are rising, labor costs are soaring, USDA support is cut, and consumers are stretched thin. My operation knows tariff setbacks firsthand. I started Moon Valley Farm from scratch, borrowing tools, bartering for help, and slowly reinvesting profits to build a business that now feeds thousands weekly. I didn't inherit land or grow up farming. I'm a first-generation, self-taught farmer who spent 8 years bartering for the use of land before I was able to save enough money to buy land of my own in late 2019 as a single parent with no financial cushion. Buying land was the biggest risk of my life and the greatest leap of faith. But just as I took that leap, prices skyrocketed. Steel prices soared, lumber costs spiked, and the high tunnels and greenhouses that I had planned for year-round vegetable production became astronomically expensive. And these aren't luxury investments, they are basic tools that we need to grow spinach in the winter and start tomatoes early and keep people employed year-round. Without them, my business growth was delayed, and thousands of families who rely on our CSA boxes face less reliable access to fresh food. This is what happens when trade policy is made without considering who pays the price. The chaos from these tariffs doesn't just hit corporations or foreign competitors, it hits small farms like ours. It hits our margins, our families, and makes it harder to create jobs, to grow food, and build community. And if you didn't know already, tariffs aren't farmers' only challenge, though they are a preventable one. We're facing a perfect storm of policy cuts and climate disasters. Programs like Local Food for Schools that help small farms access institutional markets have been eliminated. Proposed massive cuts to SNAP threaten the food security of the families we serve. And meanwhile, we're facing extreme weather events, flooding, drought, unprecedented temperatures, and temperature swings are hammering our production costs. And now we face another wave of tariff-driven costs touching every aspect of our operations. I'm caught between two impossible choices, and so are all of the farmers that I'm representing today, to absorb costs that could bankrupt our farms or raise prices on families already struggling with grocery bills. And of course, the cruel irony is that voters chose the current leadership because they were angry about high food prices. Yet these tariff policies will force small farms like mine to raise prices even more. We're being asked to solve a problem while being stripped of the tools we need to solve it. The local food system isn't theoretical, it is real. It's people like me and my team working dawn to dusk in greenhouses that cost double what they should. It's our customers, our school kids, the chefs, our patients managing diet-related illnesses who depend on us. It's the land that we care for that suffers when we can't afford climate-smart infrastructure we know we need. When you hit us with tariffs, you're not just affecting our bottom line, you're threatening food security and the economic vitality of communities across America. Our national security depends on regionally based food security. We need small and medium-sized farms succeeding and growing food for our communities, or we'll be at the mercy of other countries to feed us when disaster strikes. And in this climate, I wouldn't want that to happen to us. So thank you all for your time and for centering stories of those most impacted by these decisions.
Ms. Jagos, thank you so very much for your testimony here as well. We're now going to move to questions. We're going to begin with Senator Peter Welch.
I want to thank everybody. I'll start with you. Just a reaction. How did you manage to do all this? You don't have to go. That's astonishing what you've done. It really is amazing. And Steve, what you've done up there at JPEAK, where you deal with all those uncertainties. And I always think, Mr. Chairman, our job here is supposed to be to pass policies that make it easier for you to do your job back home, not harder. I just want to acknowledge that. A couple of questions. First of all, there's this myth that that other countries will pay the tariffs. Is there any truth to that, or do you agree with Mr. Wright and Ms. Jagos that our consumers are going to end up footing the bill for this?
Thank you, Senator Welch, and I want to echo that the evidence from data from national collections is very similar to what my fellow witness said. There are very specific instances of particular industries where it's extremely competitive and the U.S. has many alternative sources where the exporting companies absorb the tariffs. This is less than 10% of this
So
case.
bottom line.
Bottom line, everything
manufacturer
from the tariffs experienced over the last 10 years in the U.S., 90%
Okay.
get paid by the American consumer or by the importing
So it's a
company, like the
tax.
bicycle thing. It's a tax.
Yeah, Ms. Lee, one of the issues that is of great concern to me is if all of these tariffs are being done on a negotiation by negotiation basis by one person, namely the president, how does that provide any certainty? And how does that facilitate essentially quid pro quo type of corrupt deals being made or arbitrary decisions being made?
It is absolutely the worst way to make economic policy. We are at the whim of an egotistical power broker. We don't know who he had dinner with or lunch with or who bought his cryptocurrency, but those kinds of decisions are inherently corrupt. And so this is a huge problem for American workers because they're not going to dinner at Mar-a-Lago. You know, they're not buying cryptocurrency. Their livelihoods are
They
at
don't
risk
have-
every day.
They don't have Secretary Besson's phone number to call and get a break, right?
Apparently not, yeah.
Okay, Steve, I've just been hearing about these agonizing stories when I visited up in the Northeast Kingdom and how heartbreaking it was for folks like you in the hospitality industry to get these calls from people that you work with and have a great deal of affection for, where they were telling you they're canceling and feel very hurt. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit on that. We're really dependent on our Canadian visitors, right?
Yeah, I mean, specifically at JP, as you know, 50% of our top line revenue and 60% of our bottom line profit is derived from Canadian business. So, and Canadians have a long history with JP. They don't want to not come to JP, but the country, a large index of the country has been galvanized by that anti-Canadian rhetoric. You go into the eastern townships, which was originally sort of founded by separatists, where you used to see fleur-de-lis flags hanging everywhere. Those have been replaced by maple leaves. And that's one of the few things that you could do to galvanize that part of Canada is to go after their sovereignty. So the conversations that I had with these Canadian households who aren't coming back next year, there were tears on most of these Canadian guests I knew. So I had a very informal conversation with them. Many had tears and were choking up over the fact that they just couldn't in good conscience come to the States. And, we simply as a business said, we're trying not to be too polarizing in our response to what's happening, because I have conservatives that
Right.
ski and ride at JP.
It's not a party deal.
Right.
It's not a political issue.
Exactly. And we say simply, we have empathy for the fact that Canadians need to make hard decisions. And they're having to make hard decisions left, right, and center.
Right. Is there anything good that can come out of these tariffs that would benefit the Northeast Kingdom in JP?
Well, I've thought long and hard about it, and I haven't figured anything out. I mean, the impact that I have seen initially was we negotiated, or in the middle of a negotiation for a new chairlift that is somewhere in the vicinity of $15 million, and we got 75% through the negotiation process, and the lift manufacturer said, we have a new price for you. We're not sure what it is, but it could be 50% higher. We'll let you know, and we discontinued the conversation.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. All of the witness really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Welch.
Yeah.
Appreciate you being here. Let me also follow up with some questions. Maybe let me start with Mr. Martin with BTI. Thank you for your comments and for your questions and being here. Let me ask you, because I think we're getting, some of this is also getting lost on not only the additional costs that you all are incurring because of these tariffs, not only the additional opportunities. I know you just mentioned in Reno you were looking to expand your business and purchase a warehouse, 29,000 square foot warehouse, which then you had to cancel because of the additional costs. But what we also are missing out on here are the jobs that are created, right? The opportunity to put people to work. And Mr. Martin, if you were able to open that warehouse in Reno, how many people would you have employed in Nevada?
Currently, BTI has about 25 people in Nevada, and I would get, given the extra space, we'd have room for 50% more people.
And that's the shame, I think, of all of this as well, is the policies that we are talking about. And I think, Dr. Posen, you touched on this. Our policies should be congressionally driven in the sense that we want to grow this economy and create jobs. And the policies are just the opposite.
Yes.
Right? And that to me is sometimes getting lost in, at the end of the day, it is very simple. People want a good life. They want less stress. They want to be able to work. We want a good economy. We want everybody to thrive. And that's where our policy should be. But this policy is not there. Let me ask for our business folks, because I hear this constantly at home with respect to the uncertainty in these tariffs. How do you make long-term decisions and investments when these policies, particularly the tariffs policies, continue to change day to day? I mean, how do you deal with it when you're hearing, okay, it's going to be another 90 days or another 90 days? I'm curious, can you explain that to the general public, how you deal with that in your day-to-day activities? And Mr. Wright? you wanna
Yep,
start?
sure. For us, it's trying to forecast forward which suppliers will ultimately be integrating a tariff against some of the products that we buy. So we have all of our director level employees spending almost all of their time trying to source different suppliers of theoretical of businesses that will enact a theoretical tax somewhere down the road. Our suppliers and most of the expenses that we put forward are still down the road a little bit, so we're not entirely sure what's going on. But what bothers me in that scenario is the opportunity cost that's lost with those staff members should be looking for other ways to help grow the business. They're trying to look for ways to help reduce the hurt that we're going to feel on the bottom line. So that bears forward somewhere in the future where we haven't put enough energy in growing the business.
Yeah, thank you. I'm curious.
Yeah, it's hard for us. Diversity on the organic farm is definitely what we is a safety net for us. And when we're not spending extra cash on improving our soils, we might be spending it on improving our infrastructure so that we can be more climate resilient and offer more steady products or a steady stream of products like salad all winter long, for example, to our customers. The past in all of 2025, it's been really hard for us to plan because we have contracts with the federal government under the USDA that have been paused, that have been threatened. We know that the tariffs are a threat to the cost of our operating expenses, and that the labor pool in Maryland is at risk as well. So overall, it's been, I don't have a clean answer for you besides that we're focusing on what we can do to promote diversity within, not only within our crop selection, but within our sales channels to weather these storms.
Yeah. And Mr. Martin, the same thing, as you now are dealing with these tariffs, what does that mean as you're negotiating? Because you talked a little bit, these causing never-ending negotiations that you probably didn't have prior to this tariff policy. Is that correct?
Correct. With hundreds of brands, every new change restarts the conversation again with each vendor. BTI is not the manufacturer. We are the middleman. So we depend on the vendor to decide when and how to increase prices and effectively protect margins for everybody in the supply chain themselves, the distributor, the retailer, and still be competitive at the end of the day.
Yeah.
It's an impossible challenge when things are changing every day. Also, our product takes a long time to get from the time we initialize a purchase order until it shows up in our warehouse. You're looking at 5 months. You've got time for the production to happen, and you've got time on the ocean while it's on a boat to go through port, go on a truck, go inland to our warehouse, and be put on a shelf. So, when we have such long lead times, and things are changing so fast in the meantime, it creates a lot of new headaches and uncertainty.
Yeah, and let me also add an additional thing that most people don't think about unless your revenue is generated from tourism and trade, is that you are counting on people having disposable income, right? If they have disposable income, then they will be more willing to maybe take that bike trip or come out skiing or take that travel or fly into Las Vegas to enjoy the amenities. But if there is no disposable income, that is going to have a devastating impact on our tourism and trade in this country. And that's part of what we're seeing as well, along with these tariffs and unfortunately, the rhetoric coming from this administration. I'm going to pause my questions here. We've been joined by one of my great colleagues here, Senator Blumenthal, who's been a fantastic advocate in fighting for and highlighting the unfair policies of this administration when it comes to tariffs and trades and so many other things that we're dealing with in this economy. Senator?
Thank you very, very much, Senator Cortez Masto, who has been, as you all know, a real leader in the fight for fairness to small businesses as well as workers. And I want to thank you for bringing us together here. Very, very important. And I know many are watching online, even if they can't be in the room, and you're giving them heart in the sense you're showing them that people care about these issues, care for their situation, and many people are really wrestling with the kind of uncertainty that you've described here, the unpredictability, the chaos, inability to invest, to plan for the future. And I would like to ask the business people who are here, when the president says to Walmart, or in effect to any of you, well, just raise prices, how would you answer that kind of instruction or suggestion? I mean, to me, as a non-business person, it's obviously going to impact the consumer, which eventually impacts your sales, I would guess, because most of these sales are elastic. They'll depend on what price levels are. They're not necessities, and even if they were, people might cut back. But let me hear from you about the effects on your businesses. And I'd love to hear from Mr. Wright, Ms. Jagos, and Mr. Martin particularly, but others as well.
So we sell groceries, essentially. They're just fresh from our farm direct to families and restaurants. And families and restaurant owners are already squeezed. And in fact, grocery prices was an election topic, right? And so just raising prices on people's groceries, especially in an industry with really tight margins already, for me, on the farm, you know, if I had to raise prices for something, it would be because the heat waves and the droughts decreased our yields, or because we had to increase the wages for our employees because the cost of living is much higher than it ever has been, or because our costs of healthcare to our employees has increased because they're losing Medicare access. So I would rather raise prices for one of those reasons, and because those are very real reasons that I may have to raise prices in the near future. I don't want to have to raise prices again because of this, this tariff situation that seems entirely preventable.
Thank you. Mr. Wright?
Yeah, I would answer that in two ways for the ski resort that I run. One, affordability is a big part of our brand. I mean, as you may know, the ski industry has, for the most part, gotten out of control with what it is that they're charging for people to go and enjoy their mountains. J-Peak is notched into a very affordable range, and for us to escalate costs takes us away from the biggest part of our brand. The other part of that is that we rely on the Canadian economy for 50% of our top line and 50 to 60% of our bottom line. And if I start escalating costs to Canadians, at the same time we're continuing to whack them with this reckless narrative about their sovereignty, I'm going to lose half of my business. So I've got to be judicious about how I manage those costs to them.
Great. Mr. Martin?
I'm reminded of a recent news story in our industry magazine, bicycle retailer. It talks about Kent, USA, closing its production facility here in the United States. 64 jobs lost. Why? It's because they import their bicycles from China. They import a frame, they import the parts, and then they do the assembly here in the U.S. And those are the jobs that were lost, is those assembly jobs. They don't, with these higher tariffs on China, their bicycles became so expensive that their primary customers, these big box stores, basically say, no, our customers can't afford the bikes with the tariffs. And so, they're essentially forced to close as a result. And so this is a major hit, because these are the bikes that, are an entry-level bike for a consumer who doesn't have a lot of disposable income, is choosing that big box store bike because they can afford it. And so if they don't have that bike, they may never have a bike in their whole life.
Thank you. My time has expired, but I want to thank this panel and thank Senator Cortez Masto. Ideally, this panel would be testifying before a full committee on the record, and for obvious reasons relating to my Republican colleagues essentially disclaiming and ducking responsibility for the confusion, chaos, and cost. It's in this setting, but have no doubt that you are making a difference, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. We've been joined by Senators Warren, Klobuchar, and Baldwin. Senator Warren.
Thank you, and thank you for holding this hearing. And I want to echo what Senator Blumenthal said. It's really important that you're here and that we build a record and that we make this available to the American people. So thank you very much for being here. I'm glad we have a chance to talk about what's happening to our economy thanks to Donald Trump's on-again, off-again tariffs, like a giant game of red light, green light, and how he's yanking markets around, he's pushing up costs, he's discouraging businesses from investing and creating jobs. You're here today to talk with us about how this chaos is hurting real people, how it hurts small business owners, workers, and consumers. In fact, it seems that the only people who are benefiting from the tariffs are President Trump's billionaire donors. We've seen time and again how Trump's erratic tariff policy, his so-called negotiations, have become glorified auctions to the highest bidder to secure lucrative exemptions and special treatment. And of course, that is the kind of access that only money can buy. Take the example of Apple's CEO, Tim Cook. He donates $1 million to Trump's inauguration campaign, then sits in the front row at the inauguration. Well, a few weeks ago, Cook was worried about iPhones getting hit by tariffs, so he calls up the Commerce Secretary and he calls up his friends in the White House, and suddenly there is a whole new set of tariff exemptions that could save Apple billions of dollars. So, Mr. Martin, let me ask you, you own a bicycle parts company. I know tariffs have driven up your costs. Have you been able to call up the White House or call Donald Trump directly and ask for an exemption for your products?
As president of BTI, I've written the president multiple times and not heard any response. The industry has written a letter to the president's office, and to my knowledge, there's been no response.
So the best you can do is you can send a letter and you're getting nothing in response. Okay, let's look at the rest of this. Doesn't stop there. Small businesses are struggling to make business decisions in the midst of this tariff chaos. And it turns out a few people are getting the inside scoop. In April, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent went to a private investor event hosted by J.P. Morgan and told the people at that event that de-escalation with China would come in the very near future. And just a few hours later, President Trump reversed his tough talk, indicating that China tariffs would indeed come down substantially, boosting stock prices and creating a payday for any of the Wall Street insiders who might have traded on this extra information and early information that they'd gotten. So, Mr. Wright, you own a hotel. I'm sure it's tough for you right now to make business decisions like hiring or wages. while Trump is doing this red light, green light with tariffs. So let me ask, are you getting any special heads up, any inside intel from the Secretary of the Treasury to help you out with your decision making?
No, it's we've had a letter writing campaign as well with not much feedback.
Okay, so someone else gets inside information and it works. Now, supposedly, these tariffs are all about making a bunch of new trade deals, but is Donald Trump making trade deals to help level the playing field for American workers? Of course not. Turns out Elon Musk's Starlink had been having trouble getting permits to operate overseas, but after Trump imposed the tariffs and Trump said he'd negotiate, countries lined up to help out Trump's then best friend, Elon, who was still first buddy at the time. In one case, a Bangladeshi official was led straight from a meeting with Trump trade officials to another room in the White House where Elon Musk reportedly implied that Bangladesh, quote, would not be able to get favorable trade terms from the United States if Starlink wasn't allowed entry into the Bangladeshi market. And a few weeks later, approved. So, Ms. Lee, you have spent your career advocating for American workers. Do they get to waltz into these Trump trade negotiations and make demands like Elon Musk?
Absolutely not. While there have been some pro forma consultations and meetings with labor representatives, workers are not buying million-dollar dinners at Mar-a-Lago, they're not promising to build golf courses in exotic locales, and they don't have Secretary Bessent on speed dial. So decisions that are affecting their livelihoods are being made behind closed doors, sometimes, as I think Senator Lujan mentioned, without even the cabinet secretaries present, and workers' lives are being buffeted by these erratic and arbitrary policies.
Well, thank you. You know, look, Trump's chaotic tariffs are not about helping workers. They're not about protecting American businesses. They are about lining the pockets of Trump's own donors, and everyone else can pay the price for that. But there is power in our standing together and pushing back, and I appreciate each one of you being here today. Thank you for holding this hearing. Thank you, Senator
Warren,
Cortez
thank you
Masto.
so very much. Senator Klobuchar, you're recognized for questions.
Thank you. Well, thank you to you, Senator Lujan and Senator Cortez Masto, for holding this really important forum here. And what I like about it is the emphasis on small business. I have long said they are basically going to be roadkill in this because they don't have the resources or the reserves to be able to deal with this. You know, maybe, Mr. Wright, we want all hotels to do better, small, big, medium, but bigger ones might have the reserves to do it, or they can close something down and then reopen it later. Not true of small ones. And I'm going to ask other questions, but I did want to say that in Minnesota, where we can see Canada from our porch, it has really been impacting us. We had last month 30% lower border crossings to things like the Grand Marais bike event was at 50%, and some of these other things where the Canadians are just so pissed off. And it's not just about the tariffs, as you all know. We went up there, Senator Shaheen and Senator Kramer and Kane and Welch and I, on a goodwill mission, and hopefully we made a little difference in terms of making it clear that not all of us agreed with the president's rhetoric, but these tariffs are going to have a long-lasting impact. I guess I'd start with you, Ms. Jagos, in terms of just from a farmer standpoint. Could you, and local food system standpoint, your testimony mentioned concerns about SNAP benefit cuts compounding the pressure from tariffs. Can you talk about how it's like just headwind of unbelievable nature for small grocery stores, for farmers, and for anyone in the food area?
Absolutely. So farmers rely on farmers market sales, and a lot of the attendees of farmers markets utilize SNAP benefits and are only able to get high quality fresh produce because of those SNAP benefits. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to afford this nutrient-dense food that they're able to using SNAP. So in short, it's really affecting the lowest income population, those at the intersection of food insecurity and food access, and that's a large part of our customer base. And it's a large part of many farmers' customer bases. And it's frankly one of the most feel-good parts of what we do, because we're able to access people who really truly appreciate and need this food that we're growing. It's truly nourishing their families, and with that at risk, it's just really disappointing to be able to have to look into people's eyes and say, we see that you're hungry, we see that you need this and you want this, and you're unable to access it.
Thank you. Dr. Posen, thanks for being here. And there's, of course, we all know ongoing litigation around these tariffs, and the 3-judge panel with one Obama judge, one Trump-appointed judge, and one Reagan-appointed judge, there seem to be a number of them around, unanimously said that this was illegal, the use of the statute that the Trump administration used. We also had a vote in the Senate about Canada that Tim Kaine and I and others put forward. Senator Cantwell has another bill. Could you talk about what are the implications of allowing any president to unilaterally impose sweeping tariffs, sweeping trade taxes under emergency authorities, and what should we do to restore the balance?
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for your and Senator Kaine and Senator Caldwell and others' leadership in standing up for Congress and therefore the American people's right to proper process in the decision about their trade and their taxation. What I can tell you is, without being a constitutional lawyer, that emergency powers are no way to make tax policy. They induce corruption of the sort that Senator Warren was talking about, because inherently they give the executive branch the ability to grant exemptions and do favors in a way that legislated tax does not. And that wastes money and distorts the system and reduces revenues for a given tax. As all of the panelists today and the opening remarks by Senator Cortez Masto and Senator Lujan have said, uncertainty sits over everybody. And inherently, when you're dealing with bilateral negotiations with other countries concentrated in a non-principles way in the executive, you are creating an uncertainty that holds over every small business, every investor, every household. There is a reason why we had large trade deals and rules-based trade deals, and it was primarily this, that if you try to renegotiate everything at once, you end up with these empty deals and great uncertainty of the sort we have now.
I think over 50 changes to the tariffs.
Yes, and so finally, across the board, tariffs can understandably be legislated. I might argue against them, I might argue for them, mostly against, but they could be legislated and dealt with. Inherently, if it's done by executive order, it is capricious and it cannot be relied upon. So the uncertainty will remain until the courts and legislation cut off this kind of abuse of executive power.
Thank you.
Senator Klobuchar, thank you very much. Senator Baldwin, you're recognized for questions.
many farmers are still dealing with these impacts, making the current landscape even more difficult for them. This time around, farmers are contending with a 10% tariff on Canadian potash, which is a critical ingredient in fertilizer. And also unpredictable and chaotic trade policy. Temporary pauses and unclear negotiations bring really no comfort to the farmers I represent, as the threat of more tariffs and retaliatory actions are looming. So I've been traveling around my state, I'm listening to my farmers who are downright scared right now. All they're asking for is a fair shot to compete. And what they're getting instead is this frantic trade war. So can you talk about the changes you've had to make to your operations because of the administration's trade policy and how this uncertainty is impacting your farm?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I think that overall, the answer is just we're stalled. Instead of being able to grow and pursue growth, growing on more land, investing in more infrastructure that will save our bottom line in the long term, instead of being confident and making investments that will better our employee working conditions, the quality of our soils, and instead of making any of these investments that would give us a return on investment, either financially or socially or environmentally, we're stalling. We're sort of holding our breath, as we're, of course, farming actively as we have to. It's June.
Right.
My fields are bustling and full right now, and so yes, of course, we're planting, we're selling, we're doing the thing, but we are not actively pursuing growth because it's really hard to know if we're going to have any financial support from the U.S. Department of Agriculture or many of its programs that support us through conservation practices, through labor practices, through marketing, whether or not we're going to be hurt by these tariffs, and what climate disaster we're going to face this season.
Right.
So we're just holding tight.
Thank you. Ms. Lee, thank you for your thoughtful testimony. I have a written copy, even though I wasn't here when you delivered it in person earlier today. I share your vision for a trade policy that puts workers at the center and an industrial policy that incentivizes domestic production to correct decades' worth of harmful policy decisions that hurt states like Wisconsin and creates and sustains good-paying, often union jobs that are a proven pathway to middle-class status. But this administration has shown that it really doesn't care about workers. While the president claims he's enacting policies to help bring back manufacturing, in reality, he is just paying workers lip service. His tariff agenda is wreaking havoc on the economy, causing supply chain disruptions and destroying the United States' credibility, all while forcing hardworking Americans to bear the costs. As the United States loses footing in global markets and geopolitically, our competitors are more than willing to step in. Can you discuss how the Trump administration's policies are creating opportunities for China to gain leverage over the United States, and how our progress to remain competitive has slowed or at times even reversed?
Thank you so much, Senator Baldwin, for that question. And it breaks my heart to see that this administration's turning its back on the world, insulting trading partners, valued trading partners, is actually setting us back and enhancing China's standing and China's ability to engage. During my 4 years in the administration, a big part of what we did was around showing that the United States could be a valued partner, whether it was through labor rights programs in other countries where we wanted to lift up workers. We wanted to make sure that all workers could exercise their fundamental human rights, and to create a contrast with what China was doing, which was investing in infrastructure, but often undermining workers' rights. And, and now this administration has canceled all of our labor rights programs, all of our AID programs, all of our foreign assistance. That was a key way that we were engaged, but also, even more important, on issues like forced labor, where China is an abuser of workers in Xinjiang and in the labor transfer program. We needed to build relationships and friendships with other trading partners like the European Union and Australia and Canada and Mexico, so that they could, and South Africa and Brazil, so that we could work together. This administration doesn't believe in coordination and cooperation, it just believes in bullying. And that's going to hurt all of us. It's going to hurt the U.S. standing, probably, as others have said on this panel, for years, if not decades to come.
Thank you. And Mr. Martin, I'm sorry to hear all of the ways that the Trump tariffs have impacted your business. It's clear that the tariffs are one problem, and the haphazard, chaotic way that they are enacted is yet another. In other words, chaos is its own tariff. You mentioned that addressing changes in tariff policy takes time and money away that could have been spent growing your business and investing in wages and benefits. Can you walk me through how far in advance you make business decisions and elaborate on how the changing tariff landscape has changed your day-to-day? I think you're on mute.
There we go.
Yep, we can hear you
Can
now.
you hear me? Okay, great. So, BTI is a distributor. We import products and we resell them to dealers through our website. And so we rely on the manufacturer to make the product, to set the pricing for the product, and BTI then make sure that the pipeline is full, that there's always the right product at the right place at the right time. That is the big challenge right now. Is we can't plan ahead effectively if we don't know what the pricing will be. If the CBP, the U.S. Customs, is not going to line up with the current administration policies, for instance, and we end up having to request credits from CBP for things that weren't correctly applied at the time the goods were received into port. So yeah, there's all these moving parts that it's not something you can plan for. We're just faced with having to mop up the mess as we go.
Thank you.
I appreciate that, Mr. Wright. More confusion, more uncertainty. I apologize for that. Senator Baldwin, thank you so very much for your questions. Senator Cantwell, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Senator Lujan, and thank you to you and Senator Cortez Masto for doing this important meeting, and all our witnesses for your important testimony. What a critical moment to understand America's opportunities, and also what devastating contraction can come from not having a rules-based approach. So thank you, Ms. Lee, for talking about that, how I think the poster here, cost, chaos, and corruption. When you don't have a rules-based approach, no one can follow what's going on. No one knows what's going on. The people who are most impacted don't get to discuss those policy choices. This is one of the reasons why we filed the Cantwell-Grassley bill. We think this is way overboard by a White House that never was authority constitutionally given to the president. It's given to us. So the bottom line is we should take it back because he's clearly abusing it, and that is what these court decisions have said so far as it comes to the Economic Emergencies Act, which only gives you the ability to do something for 150 days. Okay, but get to the real immediate damage. Dr. Posen, you're basically saying that it doesn't even matter about the tax cuts in this proposed big, beautiful bill, that the tariffs for most households will wipe that out. So we're not getting any getting anything for the American consumer, in addition to putting huge burdens on businesses, and I say on fiscal policy to boot, because now you have you got monetary policy going to become more expensive, you have businesses who are strapped and stretched, and now somebody's trying to promise consumers something in another bill. It's not going to happen because of this. So, but I'm also intrigued by the fact that, Dr. President, you're also saying that U.S. pattern of production is moving away, that it's going to hurt us most on innovation. And Ms. Lee, you talk about chips and science and what we did to send a price signal in a rules-based way that, yes, we're up to speed to take on some of the biggest innovation challenges in the world today. And if you want to do that, come to the United States of America, whether that was through the Chips and Science Act or through the Inflation Reduction Act with the incentives on exploring so many next-generation energy things. So we were well on our way. I asked one knowledgeable former government person about this, and they said, well, you know, if you go back to growing the middle class, if you grow 2 million people into the middle class, you'll be back to growing the middle class today. Those two bills had already grown in a short period of time over 800,000 middle class jobs because they're high wages. So we had the right approach. We should be doubling down now on workforce training. Instead, we're throwing it into cost and chaos, and so we're really going to hurt our long-term competitiveness as a nation from doing this. So we're not getting any short-term gain. Nobody's going to make any money here, and you're going to curtail our long. So could you, either of you, comment on your analysis of that?
Senator, you're absolutely right. Even if our goal is to create more manufacturing or good jobs, by taking away the kinds of inputs that my colleague on the panel from the bicycle world is taking, you can't compete in manufacturing if you're further up the value chain where the better jobs are, if you can't substitute for these imports at any reasonable price. You can't force China to change its behaviors, its predatory behaviors, if you haven't prepared ahead in terms of finding, as the Ali just said, with allies, alternative sources for the things you get from China and dependable sources. And that has all been thrown aside. And ultimately, you're creating this air of uncertainty, which means that foreign companies which have invested here and created good jobs are less and less willing to do so because it's uncompetitive and you can't export from the US to anywhere else. So you're absolutely right. This is backfiring even for its stated goals.
Ms. Lee?
Yes, just to build on what Dr. Posen said, I mean, this is short-term pain and long-term pain. There is no short-term pain for the long-term gain because we are destroying the rules-based system. Now, listen, I've been a critic, as you know, of the rules-based system. I want to change the rules, but I want to go into the World Trade Organization or into our trade negotiations and bargain with our trading partners and figure out how we can come to consensus. And that may be a slow process, and I wish it would faster, but we can't just blow it up. And I think one of the key things is we're not going to succeed in the global economy by trashing the things that we're good at. Science, technology, higher education, tourism, advanced manufacturing. These are things that we, as you said, we were building a foundation with the IIRA and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act and the Chips and Science Act. We were doing exactly the right thing, which was trying to incentivize and produce and support advanced manufacturing and infrastructure and clean energy here in the United States of America. And that's all been destroyed by the Trump administration just because they didn't do it. Not because it wasn't creating good jobs, but that gives, I think, the lie to the idea that this administration gives a hoot about good jobs or manufacturing jobs or working people. So it's really tragic to see what's gone on.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cantwell, thank you so very much. Leader Schumer, you're recognized.
Well, thank you, and I first want to thank Senators Lujan and Cortez Masto for holding this. Senator Wyden, you'll hear from. He's one of our, you have two of our greatest experts on these issues, Senator Cantwell, who you just heard from, head of the ranking member of the Commerce Committee, and Senator Wyden, ranking member of the Finance Committee. And first, just to let our audience who are on live stream, who are watching on C-SPAN, why are we holding these spotlight hearings? For a simple reason. our Republican colleagues will not hold these hearings and get the views of people who don't agree with them out. They know what they're doing is highly unpopular, whether it's cutting Medicaid, cutting SNAP, eliminating the investment tax credit, or the kinds of crazy tariff proposals that we've seen. And so they just don't want people to know. But we have decided, and this is in this forum under Senator Lujan and Cortez Masto's leadership, that we're going to get the word out anyway. They wouldn't call all of you to tell your story, even though when we used to have hearings, they were very much more bipartisan. They don't want the story to get out, but it's getting out. And I want to thank you for coming and participating in that way. We've had a lot of success with lots of people streaming and watching on C-SPAN and other ways our hearing. And look, if there's one word to describe the policy of the administration, it's chaos. And I remember Mr. Navarro back in the first Trump administration. And when I met with him, I said, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. And at the same time, I said, he's one of these people who he thinks saying something makes it true. Well, actually, as it turns out, he was sort of eased out on the tariff slot in the first administration, and Lighthizer came in, who at least had some rationality on tariffs. But now Navarro's back, maybe for the reason that he pardoned Donald Trump, not because, that he went to prison to not turn state's evidence against Donald Trump for something he witnessed. But now he's in charge. That's probably the main reason Trump likes him. But he's in charge, and it's chaos. And the fact that they could announce a major tariff policy and the Secretary of Treasury, who's supposed to be the economic expert, not even know about it when it was announced, we've never seen anything like this. So there's chaos, number one. And we all know, some of you business people know better than anybody. When there's chaos, businesses freeze. I've talked to the heads of some of the biggest financial institutions in New York, as well as little store owners, including a bicycle shop owner over there. He's not on the screen, Mr. Martin. But they can't plan. If you don't know what's going to happen 3 months or 6, and so it freezes the economy. And when it freezes the economy, it means that new jobs aren't hired, new contracts aren't fulfilled, et cetera. So that's one of the great dangers. But the other is it raises costs on people. And if there were a rational policy, I've been a China hawk my whole career. And you know, a good tariff policy would have had the rest of the world allied with us to get China to play fair. But instead, this policy has done the perverse opposite. It's gotten all the countries of the world to be with China against us because they think Trump is erratic, vindictive, non-rational, call it what you will. And so we're stuck with these tariffs, and the courts sometimes say yes and sometimes say no. But until they're gone, the American economy is not going to, it's gone and restructured, is not going to advance. If fully enacted, it is estimated that the GDP would go down by 8%. That's like an asteroid hitting the economy in a certain sense. Wages down 7%, cost middle-income households $58,000 over their lifetime. I mean, it's just wacky. And we estimate it would cost the average household $2,500 a year, $4,700 a year if the global tariffs go into effect. And one of the things Trump has said about this is that he wants to do it so he can cut taxes for the wealthiest people in our country. Now, you know, there are a lot of millionaires and billionaires in this country who've made a lot of money. God bless them. I don't resent them. But they don't need a tax break. And certainly they don't need it coming out of the wallets and pocketbooks of the average American, who's going to pay so much more. Hikes on food and clothing and cars and textiles, shoes by 30%, apparel 28%. Cars could go up by 10% long-term, $5,400. Building new homes cost $11,000 more. So the bottom line is there are two reasons that these are very bad, among others. One is chaos. It just freezes business. The other is it imposes costs on working families, all to help families that are doing well. We're opposing them with everything we have. I thank Senator Lujan. I thank Senator Wyden for his patience, and I thank our great panelists. Thank you for being here.
Leader Schumer, thank you for being with us today. Senator Wyden, ranking member of the Finance Committee, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator Lujan. It's great to have you on the committee, great to have a leader here. And you all have been wonderfully patient. It's been a hectic day. I think as much as anything, we're trying to link the substance of the policies we pursue with some smart ways to kind of communicate. I always say when I'm home and I have these town hall meetings, I've had like 1,120 of them, I say, let's talk about the Republic. Caviar over kids. That's kind of how I started off. And then I say Mar-a-Lago over the middle class. And you get a sense that we can start talking about these issues in ways that are understandable and pretty straightforward. And out of those kinds of efforts, you find projects that help us, and this is what Senator Lujan and Senator Cortez Masto have done that's such a service. You get an idea of how to come up with policies that make sense, and you can help us with that. Senator Warren and I, for example, recently, we pointed out that retired people are really suffering as a result of these tariffs and the like, and making it hard to get their opportunity for a decent retirement. And what we're doing is we're driving those kinds of issues to where Trump has just left kind of reality and the real needs of the people who suffer from all this chaos. For example, Trump initially said, when he heard about some of the people having real problems paying their bills and seeing prices go up, he said, well, it's just pain. It's pain, and, well, everybody ought to go along with the pain. So I was home and I was having these town meetings. Known Thea for a long time. She knows about my shady past with the Gray Panthers. And an older woman came up to me and said, I'm 82 years old. President says I'm supposed to take a lot of pain. Well, I'm having trouble paying my bills now. What else am I going to get besides the pain? What else am I actually going to get? So as we try to sort through these issues, one of the most important ones has been to make sure that people are working hard, and why this program that my colleagues have put together has been so good, will get a dignified retirement and don't have to accept Donald Trump's vision of what is okay, that they have a lot of pain and maybe they go without taking their medicine, or they can't go to the market and buy chicken or something that might give them some better nutrition. So Thea, why don't we just get your take on this, because you've worked with us often, before, and I was Oregon's first Democrat to be elected to the United States Senate in more than 30 years, because these were the kinds of issues that really mattered at home and what I've tried to emphasize. But what do you think is kind of the path forward, Ms. Lee, when you have a president of the United States saying that older people who are having real problems making ends meet, and he's raising their expenses, remember he said he wouldn't do it, raising their expenses, and tells them, well, that's the way it goes, just accept the pain. What do you think the response is?
Well, thank you, Senator Wyden, for that question. I think we're all struggling with how do we communicate in this moment of time. But at the end of the day, the president has weaponized the trade debate in a way that is truly dishonest, that he is trying to buy into people's pain to say, oh, you didn't like inflation, you didn't like globalization, you didn't like companies moving jobs offshore. Therefore, I'm going to fix it for you. I'm going to bring all the jobs home. I'm going to, cut inflation on day one. I'm going to stop all the wars. And yet he hasn't delivered any of that. And I think the American people need to hold him and all the members of Congress, including the Republican members of Congress who aren't here today, to account, to say, you haven't even articulated a reasonable policy. We don't know. I think all the business people who are here today who have done an extraordinary job laying out what kind of challenges they face, trying to just do their business, trying to run a resort, a farm, a bike shop, and they can't get their heads around it because, as Senator Schumer said, in chaos, business can't operate. Business needs certainty. They need to be able to plan ahead. And even the most basic part of what Trump has promised, which is we're going to tell companies they need to bring all the jobs home. That takes time. That takes information. Businesses can't move their factories around or their businesses around if they don't even know what the tariff policy is, what the budget policy is, what the tax policy is. And so I just want to thank and appreciate that the Democrats in the Senate Finance Committee are having these conversations, are lifting up these challenges.
We have Senator Van Hollen here, but let me make an invitation to you and to our panelists, because I share your view. We have to expose the policies that are causing pain to these retirees. But one of our other colleagues, Senator Van Hollen, makes a very good point, and he's done it with me to the point where I'm thoroughly convinced. And that is, he said, look, let's definitely talk about the flaws in this horrendous bill that's come over from the House. But increasingly people come up to me, and I don't think Senator Van Hollen put him up to it. He's kind of my friend, and they say, hey, basketball player, we hear you don't like the Trump stuff. What are you guys for? Well, Senator Van Hollen has been making a very good point, and I see my friend Senator Lujan nodding his head because he's probably heard about it. We talk a lot about people around here making under $400,000 not paying more taxes. Well, we've got a lot of kids and young people, gig workers and the like, who probably aren't going to make that money in years and years. And they want to know what we're going to do in terms of the tax code. So we look forward to working with you. That's a part of the chaos. And this is not an official proceeding or anything, but I'm sure glad Senator Lujan is running it. And I'm glad that he's going to make sure that we put this into the continued part. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Wyden, thank you so very much. Senator Van Hollen, you're recognized.
Thank you, Senator Lujan. And before he leaves, thank you to my friend Senator Wyden as well, and for all your good work on finance. And you probably pointed it out, but we really should be having formal official hearings to discuss the impact of this crazy tariff policy, which is driving up prices for Americans and creating all this uncertainty. That's what would happen if Republicans were doing their job. And I know a number of them agree with us, but I want to thank all of you for being here today for this purpose, and thank you, Senator Lujan, for organizing it. And Emma, it's great to see you again. Emma's a Maryland farmer, and it wasn't that long ago, maybe a month ago, a little longer, that I had a chance to visit her farm, and she brought together a number of other Maryland farmers, and we discussed two things. One, we did discuss the harmful impact of the freezes on a number of USDA programs, especially the effort to provide local fresh food to our kids in school, which seems to be an obvious win-win for everybody. But the other was the impact of this tariff policy. And Emma brought together folks. We were in her barn, and that was a consistent message from Maryland farmers, was that the chaos created by the tariffs was hurting them. We've heard reports of many Maryland businesses who just couldn't keep their doors open. Others have had to lay people off. So I want to thank all of you for being here to testify to that. And I will just say that during the first Trump administration, when they applied very big tariffs to China, China retaliated, as we all recall. Farmers really took a big hit at that time. And in order to politically deal with that challenge, Donald Trump took $28 billion of our taxpayer money to give to farmers. So in the end, we all paid for it. You either pay for it in higher taxes or higher deficits, or you pay for it through higher prices, sometimes both. So, Ms. Jagos, if you could just zero in a little bit more on the conversation that we had and what you're hearing directly from your peers, because we want to encourage in my view, more people, young people to go into farming, but we should make it easier for them to do it, not harder.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's one thing to say that business owners can just stall. We can just kind of hang out and wait. But farmers have to make the decision in the spring to plant or not to plant. And we've already made that decision. It's June. We've already planted. And so farmers are kind of sitting back, tending our crops, cultivating, irrigating, putting more and more effort and inputs. And at the same time, the USDA and the tariff, red light, green light situation is making it so that we have no idea if we need to take off farm jobs to make ends meet this year, or if we can actually make a living based on our crops. And what you mentioned with the cancellation of the local Food for Schools program, it makes it really devastating. I mean, farmers like me have made tons of investments in additional land, in additional labor, in additional infrastructure to reach the quantity of students and schools that these institutions require. It's making, the creation of the local Food for Schools program really made opportunities for small businesses to grow and to diversify our sales streams. And at the same time that this administration is saying that they really want to revamp and revamp local or school lunches and the breakfast programs and to make them healthier, at the same time, they're gutting the very programs that we have spent years developing relationships with and investing in that infrastructure and equipment to meet those customers. So we're sitting here thinking, okay, they're saying that they want to feed the school children healthy lunches. We've been growing that food. We've been serving it to them. And they canceled the program that's doing it. And I think that's just one of the parts of this administration, the chaos and really just the saying one thing and doing another that we've all been experiencing in our industries.
I have one short of the ground. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for that. And as you point out, you're getting hit both ways, right? Coming and going by the actions of this administration. Mr. Posen, you mentioned the Ivory Coast example, and I think all of us want to see more exports of American goods. We want American businesses to be able to produce goods that are purchased overseas, and we should really work to open markets for those goods. But I think, as we all know, running a deficit with any particular country is not in and of itself a sign that we're not doing all we can to encourage American exports. Can you elaborate on that? I mean, maybe you did it in your opening statement, but I mean, I think the Ivory Coast example is a very good one because we have lots of people in the United States who help use the inputs of cocoa from the Ivory Coast for their own coffee products. We don't have the land or the temperature or the climate to produce that same product. And so by raising the cost of those imports, we're simply raising the costs of coffee for Americans and putting those producers. That's I think a good example, but can you just also use that and talk about this broader principle regarding it's not just a arbitrary, it doesn't make sense to just say arbitrarily that this is bad to run a deficit in a particular case.
Senator Van Hoen, exactly right. I will try to generalize from your lead. It's very easy to think about in the context of specialized agricultural products, even though the Trump administration doesn't seem to get it, that there is no world in which I will be growing coffee in Virginia or vanilla even in Maryland or bananas in Vermont or picket. And there's no reason, there's no advantage to depriving American consumers of that as an input to their lives as well as to other goods that American companies and workers provide value added to. And there's no reason to deprive the people of Madagascar or Ivory Coast or Brazil from making an honest living selling us something we want that is not unfair to us. So the very idea that the Trump administration, first term and now, that bilateral trade surpluses or deficits matter is completely misleading. Now, not everything is one of a kind. You can't grow it here. But there are some things that we don't want to make here. As a number of your colleagues on the committee and a number of the panelists have said, we want good jobs. We want high-paying jobs. There is no world in which screwing little screws into the backs of Apple iPhones will create good jobs for Americans. They might create good jobs for people in Cambodia. And that's not a slap on the people in Cambodia or a slap on the people in America. It is a question of, at a given country's background of capital, of training, of available resources, of people, what is a job that is their comparative advantage? There are specific industries where we can talk about, like with Airbus versus Boeing, or semiconductor chips, where we can talk about a comparative advantage that is created through industrial policy or is unfairly taken away from industrial policy, and where good jobs are at stake. But it's no way to run a trade policy to assume every trade deal and every transaction is exploiting Americans, and every other country that has a surplus is exploiting Americans, whereas actually this is exploiting working people in order to be able to sell exemptions.
Thank you. I'm glad you clarified that. I think all of us, I know Senator Lujan and myself, believe that the United States should use all the tools that we have when it comes to very strategic industries like chips, like some of our clean energy supply chains, other things like that. But to do this across the board, as you point out, really just hurts the American people. And again, I want to thank all of you, and I'd be remiss if I didn't also thank Ms. Thea Lee for all her input and advice over the years. But to all of you, thank you for your input today. And as I said, this is something really we should have both Republican and Democratic senators listening to, and I wish they were here.
Thank you, Senator Van Hollen. Ms. Lee, did you want to respond to that as well?
I just wanted to add one point, Senator Van Hollen, and to build on what Dr. Posen said, which is that even with a country like Cote d'Ivoire, for example, and products that we don't produce ourselves, it may be that there are issues like child labor in the production of cocoa or unfair labor practices in coffee that we do want to address, as we said, strategically and in a targeted way with trade policy. We might be reviewing our generalized system of preferences, our benefits. But that kind of conversation is very pointed, and there's an outcome at the end, that we are trying to make sure that workers in other countries with whom we do business are treated according to the internationally respected labor standards. And so that would be an example of how we might want to use tariff policy strategically according to the unilateral preference programs we have in place or the trade agreements that we've negotiated as a way to change behavior. But we can't change behavior if this administration never communicates what its goals are. Thank you.
No, thank you for that additional point.
Well said, Ms. Lee. Ms. Jagas, with questioning of Senator Van Hollen in and around the nutrition and farm bill, I have a list of 4 programs of the many that have been devastated by the Trump administration. These ones are specific for encouraging more work, more market between small farmers and schools and food banks and senior centers. I mean, it's billions of dollars that were devastated. And some of the farmers and ranchers I've spoken to in New Mexico, to your point of a year ago, there's a conversation before you even get to the spring as to how are we going to plan what we're going to plant in the spring. And you might be visiting with some potential customers or different programs. In this case, nutrition programs are to support seniors, kids, veterans, folks that need access to healthy food, that deserve it. So a lot of planning took place. Contracts were entered into. People decided what they were going to plant. They planted it. Well, now that it was getting closer to harvest, these programs were just canceled overnight. And now they're struggling to try to find somewhere to go and see if they can make ends meet. They're going to operate in the red. And while that's happening, to the point that Senator Van Hollen also made, the Farm Bill is being jeopardized by this big, beautiful nonsense, this big, beautiful betrayal because of what they're doing, going after nutrition programs. They say they're helping folks here and helping folks there. The national sales tax, the tariff. I mean, it's one thing after another. And it's already hard enough to live as a farmer and as a rancher. So thank you so very much. I'm hearing about this from folks back home. Mr. Martin, again, I want to thank you for being with us today, and especially having you here as someone who, I'll claim to be a mountain bike enthusiast. My people that I ride at home with, or that watch me ride, or try to keep an eye on me on Strava, they would disagree with that. But I'm still going to call myself a mountain bike enthusiast. I like to get on a trail whenever I can, and I did it a lot more before I had a stroke 3 years ago. But getting on a bike is one of my favorite things to do. And relying on businesses like yours, whenever you need a bike part, looking at frames, things of that nature. People across the country that like to get on a bicycle, they know exactly what I'm talking about. You employ people. If your business takes a hit, it's going to hurt folks back home in New Mexico. You already talked about an investment that was going to be made in Nevada that you're having to look at. Mr. Martin, you wrote this since February, if I got this correct. BTI has racked up over $100,000 in new tariffs. Now, my question is, how sustainable is it, that kind of expenditure for a company like BTI size, and what trade-offs would you have to make as a result?
Right. So with 6 digits and growing in new tariffs, the solution is for price increases to happen. Otherwise, we look at cutting other services for our customers, like free shipping and so on. So at the end of the day, it has to come from somewhere. So ultimately, what we are seeing is the bike industry is raising prices. Most of the large brands have started to do so this month. While the inflation numbers don't really show the effects of the tariffs, well, that's because there's a lag, and due to deliveries coming from overseas, it takes time to get here. And our vendors are careful not to raise prices too soon because they want to remain competitive. So everything's coming to fruition right now. This is we already have raised prices on thousands of products in our catalog, and we'll continue to do so because of tariffs, because those dollars have to go somewhere.
Now, Mr. Martin, you also testified that there's some of your customers that have had to cancel entire factory orders of bike helmets due to the Trump tariff. Do you foresee a shortage of bicycle helmets, which are mandatory for children in many states, including New Mexico?
Correct. Virtually all bicycle helmets are made in China, and when tariffs go to 145% or even 30% more, they become too expensive for the consumers, and therefore the factory, the brand is saying, no, we're not going to do the import. At this point, we are seeing there's certain brands that have determined they're not going to buy any helmets this year. There will still be some helmets, but there's going to be a shortage.
Well, Mr. Martin, when these helmets are being sold in the U.S., they have to meet certain safety standards. That someone like myself that had decompressive surgery after I had my stroke, and scar on the back of my head reminds me every day of it, that if these helmets don't protect you when you take a fall, and look, if you're riding on some of these trails and going over rocks and stuff that I probably shouldn't be, you're going to fall, and you're going to hit your head. Well, you want the helmet to hold up, so that way you're not getting crushed in. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. Helmets are there helmets save lives. It's proven.
Now,
And that's
now the
why-
reason,
Yeah,
well,
go
just,
ahead.
just real quick, if I might, the reason I'm asking that question is if there aren't safe helmets on the market, is it fair to say that there's going to be knockoffs and counterfeits for sale?
That's correct, and that's why it's so important that we close the loophole that's known as de minimis. Currently, anything $800 or under can sneak into the country without any kind of tariff on it. So you've got counterfeit products, you've got substandard batteries for e-bikes, you've got uncertified helmets coming into our country. That we need to close that, or at least revise that policy, lower that de minimis threshold from 800 down to something a lot lower.
So what I'm holding in my hand right now is a counterfeit knockoff bike helmet. That's crushed. This was crushed by me. This is what happens when there's counterfeit nonsense out there, and if someone has a head injury, then what the hell's gonna happen to them? And so extrapolate that. Like, this is just a helmet. What happens to all the other goods? That there's gonna be knockoffs and counterfeits, and people are just trying to save a buck, and they're still being sold. You can buy this today. I won't tell you what website, but all of you have the app. It worries me and it scares me to death that if I or someone my age or a little older goes down, or a young child, or they get hit by a car, they might die. I'm really worried about this. Mr. Wright, Senator Cortez Masto talked about the importance of tourism and people visiting. New Mexico has that same economy where we depend on people coming to visit our beautiful state, and I would argue the most beautiful state in the country. I won't go there. I won't ask you to say that as
Appreciate
a Vermonter,
that.
sir.
Yeah.
But specific with ski slopes, you're having to run this business. It's, you're looking at people coming through, ski lift tickets, things of that nature. But do you also make investments with infrastructure on your mountains?
Sure,
What
we
kind
have.
of things do you have to buy every year? I'm thinking of those chairs that, we get on, but can you talk to me a little bit about that and what the tariffs are doing with those decisions and impacts?
Yeah, thank you for the question. We recently were at the table with a lift manufacturer to replace one of the chairs that isn't a super pressing need to be replaced, but something that we should. It does drive top line revenue, so it's something that we've considered. We got to a certain place with respect to the cost against it, and before we had the ability to sign a contract on it, the prices went up 30 to 50%. So it immediately costed us out of that, and we'll have to move down the road a bit and see if we can't figure out another option. There aren't a ton of lift manufacturers that provide the sort of lifts that we need. So, and all of them are going to have to, come to bear against what steel costs. These aren't sitting on shelves anywhere.
Right.
These things are manufactured when the deal is signed. So even they don't know what's coming down the road 18 months from when it takes, they start construction of a lift to when they're able to deliver it.
And if a chair goes down and you're not able to replace it or things of that nature, then the mountain shuts down.
You lose money, right?
So I've heard from the chief planning officer of Sandia Peak and Pajarito ski areas out in New Mexico. We have some beautiful mountains back at home, but they've been telling me about the price inputs as well, as they're looking to make investments, improvements, looking at safety for all of their customers and clients as well. If ski mountain operators like those in New Mexico or J Peak and Vermont are paying more for imported parts, equipment, and infrastructure upgrades due to tariffs, how quickly do you have to pass that cost to visitors with higher lift ticket prices and to try to even recover?
It would be immediately. I mean, if we had the wherewithal in the first place to be able to afford these upcharges on these the lift infrastructure specifically, it would get passed on immediately. The real reality of this is that for the middle market ski resorts, like the one that I run, it is tough to compete against the Vails and Alteras of the world that own 60-70% of the market. They buy a lot of lifts. They can negotiate prices differently. They can push prices back onto their customers differently. This middle of the market, which is where I live, it's very difficult to do any of that. So it's really something that we would probably go without for some period of time, cross our fingers and hope for a change in administration, frankly.
So that's on top of international travelers being discouraged from coming to the United States, like friends from Canada, allies, trade partners. I mean, it's just one thing after another. Ms. Jagosz, if President Trump's tariffs force you to make tough choice to raise your current produce, because I think it's clear and it's been established, the prices have gone up, and we can point directly to the tariffs as well. How would this impact your current customers?
Well, we would lose the lowest income customers right off the bat. And so that closes a percent of the market off that is addressable for us. It would force us to advertise to more higher income families, and sort of that sucks some of the purpose out of it for us. You know, I didn't start a farm to only feed rich kids food. I started a farm to feed my community, and that includes everybody across all income levels. So for me, I'm going to try to find ways to still feed those living with food insecurities in my community, because that's what I believe in, but it's just going to make it a lot harder. It's going to make it harder to do with my CSA subscription, the community supported agriculture subscription. That's the backbone of my farm. We might have to look at totally alternative methods, like asking people to pay it forward and pay more for their box than we're charging to help people who can't afford it. We're going to have to get creative, but it's not obvious how we would keep serving people in lower income. Yeah. And I want to say that we collaborate with a lot of nonprofits for food as medicine programs, and besides nonprofits, hospitals like Johns Hopkins, who have found that families at the intersection of food insecurity and chronic illness really can be a lot of the negative effects on their lives can be mitigated by access to fresh produce. And so a lot of these programs are literally prescribing people and families with fresh produce from farms like mine. And it's just going to be harder for those people to afford on their own.
Wow. This comes on top of conversations I've had with faith leaders who are worried about what's going to happen to their food pantry for members of their church, their synagogue, their temple, whatever it may be. Food banks are worried about what's going to happen right now. And they say lines are getting longer. That right now, lines at food banks are almost on par with what they were seeing during COVID, because it's tough out there financially for so many families. And look, I'll just remind us all that those tough times could happen to any one of us at any time. That's not something that we should lose sight in. I appreciate that. Now, Dr. Posen, New Mexico families, as I just stated, they're already struggling. There's already challenges financially back in New Mexico, high cost of living, lingering inflation from COVID-19 pandemic, and this legislation that is about to be sent to President Trump from Republicans in the House and Senate. It's going to make it worse. It's going to make it tougher. Now, in your testimony, you write that President Trump's trade war and budget reconciliation plans will deliver a, quote, double whammy to working class families. Can you elaborate on that?
Thank you, Senator. Yes, because we can do, as a matter of objective analysis, who pays and who benefits from a given tax. And it is very clear from the analysis of the Peters Institute, but also basically by every independent entity that doesn't work for the Republican Party directly, including center-right organizations, that this is a combination of a tax on people's consumption that hits lower-income people hardest. That's the tariffs, and a tax set of cuts that benefits primarily the highest-income people and on net gives either trivial or nothing to lower income people. That's the rest of the reconciliation process. And then you get things like shortages and unemployment, because this is a negative income shock in economic terms. You're reducing the ability of households and American businesses to purchase things they otherwise would want and need. So It can show up as inflation, it can show up as unemployment, it can show up, as some of my colleagues on the panel were discussing, as shortages, which we saw during COVID. That's a different form of inflation, a different form of income loss. It doesn't necessarily show up in the CPI for the Fed to deal with, but it means that your purchasing power has gone down, which hits lower income people. So it is a double whammy, then it really is a triple whammy, because then, of course, the cuts that are being made, such as Medicaid and SNAP, are also primarily at working people. So I'm nonpartisan institution that I represent. I have personal views, but that's not the point. This is just facts. The distribution of impacts of the Trump tariffs, of the proposed tax legislation, of the cuts, all of them are negative for low-income people. They're negative even for middle-income people. They are only positive to some degree for high-income people. That's just facts.
Well, and I'll remind you, Dr. Posen, that it's not just the nutrition programs and Medicaid. Medicare's on the chopping block now. My Republican colleagues keep saying, well, they didn't put anything to cut Medicare in the bill. Well, they set up triggers under this word that the American people became familiar with called sequestration once upon a time. Another horrible economic policy that said if the numbers hit a certain level, sequestration goes into effect. Over $500 billion in Medicare cuts could result from that. So, I mean, it's one on top of another that we're seeing this happen. Very, very concerning. I appreciate your testimony. Now, Ms. Lee, in your testimony, you made a critical point that bringing manufactured jobs back to the United States isn't just about where goods are made. It's about the quality of those jobs for our constituents, for people here in the United States. Now, can you speak more to how labor rights, collective bargaining, and workplace safety standards must be part of any serious reshoring strategy?
Yes, thank you so much, Senator Lujan. You know, I worked at the Labor Department in the International Labor Affairs Bureau for 4 years, and I saw what the work of the Labor Department is in terms of wage and hour protection or child labor protection, workplace health and safety, mine safety. And these are the jobs that President Trump and the Doge gang have been attacking. And so you can't talk about bringing jobs home to the United States of America if you are simultaneously gutting the very institutions like the National Labor Relations Board and the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health and the Department of Labor that are tasked with protecting workers here in the United States of America. So this is very dire, and I'm unfortunately still engaged in all of this work, and to see this, the Department of Labor and the staff of the Department of Labor being treated disrespectfully, the programs being terminated without notice, and their programs, you know, as Emma was saying, that are supporting working families, women getting apprenticeships in the building trades, training programs, all the things that support the United States being competitive in the global economy and being able to make sure that not just are we creating a bunch of crappy jobs, we are creating good union middle-class jobs. And this administration is, actions are completely at odds with that.
I appreciate that, Ms. Lee. You know, my father was an iron worker. My mom's dad, my grandpa Luis, was a carpenter. My brother's IBW. I saw the benefit of coming together. And look, if people were treated fairly and respectfully and valued, all this other stuff wouldn't be needed. But when bad folks are out there preying on people, you need to stick together. And you need to speak with that strong voice. I very much appreciate that. Look, there are many other questions that I have for all of you. I want to be respectful of your time as well today. You've all been tough being here. Thank you for your perspective, your testimony, what you do at home, investing in community, making it about people. I mean, that's what this is all about. You know, in one of the hearings we were in earlier today, it was about transportation and the FAA and all the rest. And you know, there was a lot of conversation, but part of the conversation pointed towards faith. And I used the opportunity to ask the person to be nominated by the president if he was familiar with a certain passage, which is essentially part of the golden rule, which is, do unto others as you want them to do unto you. Treat others with respect and dignity. That's how we want to be treated as well. What happens when that doesn't happen? What happens when that's not extended? And extrapolate that in every part of life. We're worse for it. And I just hope that we can get back to that better place, being honest with the American people in this case. Complex tax policy, tariff policy. Explain it. Tell the American people what it's going to mean to them and be honest. There's some folks that deserve tax breaks and tax cuts and should be prioritized. We had a debate on the Senate floor, and some of my colleagues said, well, let's cap them at $10 million. If you're making $10 million a year, okay. You're doing okay. I want you to do better, but if you're doing better than that, maybe you don't need one. And my colleagues said no, and they said, well, what about 100 million? Well, what about 500 million? What about $1 billion? Someone makes $1 billion a year. Congratulations, you're doing well. Maybe we shouldn't be passing policy in the United States to say you deserve a tax cut. Give it to other folks. They voted no. This bill to the top 0.1% is going to put $400,000 extra dollars in their pocket. 400 grand. Some people may not make that in a lifetime. Let's be honest with the American people. Thank you all for being here and answering these questions and sharing your perspective as well. That ends this forum. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.